David, thank you for sitting down with me today. One of the things that I'm seeing when I'm talking to people and just through social media is people don't know about the election. They don't know what's going on. I mean, there's always stuff going on. I mean, it seems like every other day there's, new numbers coming out with inflation or something. So people know that stuff's going on, but it's just, I feel like people are overwhelmed sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And they think election all the way in November, not primary.
Exactly.
A number of people that I've talked to that will say as I'm leaving, hey, I'll vote for you in November. So no, June 7th.
You got to get there first, right? Exactly. So tell us about that. So just start off, just tell us about yourself, your background, and what made you want to run for Congress.
Sure. So I'm a United Methodist pastor. For 17 years, which is a long time for a Methodist pastor to be located. I've been in the Pine Belt in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Before that, Brookhaven, several other places, Atlanta for several years for graduate school, and almost stayed in Atlanta. One of my reasons for coming back is I've had several friends who've left Mississippi and left for a whole lot of reasons, but it has made me kind of wonder what would Mississippi be if all of them would have stayed, or at least some of them, because many of that I've known have been the head of their industry and gone off to do wildly innovative stuff. And what would Mississippi be like if they would have stayed and struggled through some of those things? Part of my struggle is as a pastor, I'm not one of those that kind of preaches from on high. I get in the messiness of people's lives. Whether it's grief work, addiction, trauma, you name it, finds a listen to find some simple way that they can then move forward. And through that, I kept seeing Mississippi, well, as we see it, on the top of all the bad list, the bottom of all the good list.
Yeah.
And that sparked my urge of one day wanting to run. And when the shutdown happened, that also do some work at a treatment center. I'm the spiritual director out at Pine Grove.
Wow, okay.
And we had the flex. And on that flex system, it gave me some time that says, okay, now's the time. I needed some impetus to jump in. And as my luck would have it, I had some people who saw in me this position and came to me, and then some other people who didn't know them, and it just one thing kind of snowballed into another, and I jumped off. My wife, on the other hand, said, look, you couldn't think of school board first?
Yeah, you had to jump right in the deep end to Congress, huh?
Right.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that, I think that there's really a testament to that of regardless of where you fall on the aisle or regardless of your particular policy prescriptions, I think most people can tell that there's something not right. There's something that needs happening in D.C., and I find that across the political spectrum.
It's that huge, where everything is generated, the partisan politics so much, it's all or nothing. And in the Methodist Church, or at least up until we've got our own issues going on right now that's looking quite horrific, but we used to be able to conference together and listen and hear and then make some decisions. And that's, you look at it, we really haven't done that since, I'd say, the 70s as any good degree of listening, compromising, and moving forward. You may not have liked the fullness of the whole deal, but at least you're trying something now.
Yeah. So one of the questions I'm asking everybody, and I feel like this really kind of gets to what we were talking about of people, just of politics taking over the narratives and really the atmosphere is corruption. I feel like, that should be a bipartisan, nonpartisan, however you want to describe it, issue that however we decide to structure government, however we decide what policies, that we all need to be have a good faith that we should expect that our representatives are up there doing what's right for us and not what's right for them. So one of the there's a sitting congressman running for Senate right now, and I believe he's in I can't remember what state he's in. I don't want to speak out of place, but he was talking about basically a scheme that whenever congressmen are trying to get on committees, basically what they have to do is pay the party a fee, and that it's the lobbyists that usually obviously pay that bill, and with that comes expectations to, play in a particular way. So that's just one example that I found. But there's plenty of examples of corruption through all throughout DC. So can you tell me about how do you feel about, what can be done, and what do you plan on? Is there anything you can do to fight it?
Yeah. One is there needs to be accountability. The other is calling it out. If you see it, call it out. And it shouldn't matter which. In fact, I think it should work against you if you're not able to call out your own side. We've allowed politicians to get away with calling out the other side, but it's like that old thing I heard from my mother: don't point one finger at somebody, you got three fingers pointing back at yourself.
Right, yeah.
So if you can't address the things on your own side, then, and for instance, that pay to play for whatever position you are, and to require that's an awful system. I mean, that, and when you think about parties, the party should help the politician, not the other way around. Otherwise, the system's in reverse. The party needs to do everything to help train, to educate, to motivate, to inspire, to get the word, everything for that candidate, not for the candidate to push out. Because once you get a big system built up, then it's like right now. Once you get a system at a certain level of bureaucracy, it's all about that system. Churches are a little bit like that as well.
Yeah.
I think what would help me in that position is coming from a predominantly, at least the past several years, red state. To have someone blue get elected, I would have an advantage there of them turning to me and say, ooh, let's help you. What can you tell us? What can you inform us? What's going on there? It would be an ear that other candidates would not be able to have with their own party. I mean, especially and not to pick on Republican side, but they're expected to win. And if they get in office, even if they say they'll get this done and this done and this done, well, you'll be another one amongst a whole slew of others.
Sure.
Sure. Or at least that's my.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, what do you think? I mean, you definitely need to be able to call it out, and you hope that when people will, when they see something, they'll say something type of thing. But is there anything that from your opinion, that has helped get it this way? I mean, is there anything policy-wise or something that could be done, whether it be through the particular rules of the Congress itself, that would help shine a light on this?
Ooh. On the local level, probably for voting-wise, maybe ranked voting would help in that, so that it's not strictly, because you see that division of that partisan side so much.
Sure.
Ranked voting would be another step that candidates could actually say, okay, here's where I am, instead of.
So would that be essentially like a jungle primary type of thing, or would you still have a primary? I'm not sure how that would.
So you may still have a primary, but it would take care of any types of runoffs.
Right.
Candidates would also need to distinguish themselves a little bit more than just all party lines. On the global scale, that's going to be the tougher issue. And finding ways, because they mimic one another. So your politicians are going to mimic their base and vice versa.
Absolutely.
So I think if their base has some politicians who begin to mimic, here's a better way to do politics, they're going to take that note. Though at the same time, if they're reflecting that angst and that anger and everything else, then it generates just more fear, more division.
Yeah.
How can we sit down over the table and discuss? They say you shouldn't talk about religion and politics, but to me, those were our most enjoyable discussions around the dinner table. My father worked he was in the military, and he worked for the IRS and was involved in the tax commission for Mississippi.
Okay.
And would come home all the time and say, well, here's how this person treats their staff, which was code word for, I may not be voting for this person, regardless of party.
Yeah. And that matters. That matters.
Yeah. And then we would have good discussions around, what about this issue? And my father was not afraid to go, well, what about the opposite side? And we would
play devil's advocate.
Right. And all while able to dip your cornbread and enjoy your peas, and without getting,
worked up and trying to kill each other.
Right.
That makes makes sense. It's interesting you say that. My degree is political science with a minor in religion. So that's kind of the joke I say is that you're not. I studied the things you're not supposed to talk about. The two things you're not supposed to talk about. So I definitely agree with you there. It's one of those where, not that you want to necessarily everybody you talk to, every interaction is get into a deep philosophical conversation, but you need to be able to be open about and talk to people about important subjects. And I feel like there's, these days that people just for some reason, have that as we don't talk about this, we don't get into things. So switching gears real quick, one of the real important issues that has faced Mississippi, we recently just approved the medical marijuana law here in the state. As you know, there's been, I think there's 30-something states that have enacted some type of, whether it be medical or recreational cannabis law. My question is less about the state and the program in the state and more about the federal government's role. Right now and I know there's some bills that have been kind of in limbo. I'm not sure exactly the details of those, but we're seeing plenty of people who want to make businesses, want to grow businesses, want to invest in the industry, and this legal gray area they have between the state legalizing it and the federal government saying it's illegal, causes a lot of problems. The banking system they're having to deal with in only cash, which creates just a nightmare. So what's your thoughts on the federal government's role in cannabis laws that states have passed?
I would primarily push to legalize it. Period. Recreational,
at the federal level.
Let's legalize it at the federal level. If you're not able to get the votes for that, then to get the votes as quickly as possible to have it at the medical marijuana. For those reasons that you brought up right now, it's hurting any small business because banking is trapped because it's a federal law. Right now, it also hurts any veterans in the state because they can't go to the VA, which means more money they have to fork over. Talk to a veteran in Moss Point suffering with Parkinson's, and so it's one of the top things that could help with that. But they have to fork over more money for a doctor once it is legalized here in the state to go that route because you can't get it to VA because it's not federally legalized.
Right.
It's just it should have been legalized years ago. And the way that it was politicized and stroked so many fears, and there's still so many fears that have it as a gateway drug.
Yes.
Gateway drug. We've got more evidence in the addiction treatment that nicotine is more of a gateway drug than marijuana.
You're right. Yeah. So do you think that should be? Do you think it should be legalized and sent to the states, or should it just be legalized just fully throughout the nation?
I would default to which one we can pass the quickest.
Okay.
So is granted, it's a little bit like our alcohol sales here in Mississippi. Finally, we have, across the board, it's available still in places that they finally let the counties and the cities going, all right, but there's still some counties that are dry.
Yeah.
You can leave it to local matters as much as possible. The federal just wide open. It's too easy, and there's too many missed opportunities. There's missed opportunities for tax revenue, for small businesses, for medical research. You're missing out on so much.
I agree.
Same thing we're seeing right now with incredible results with psychedelics, with PTSD, especially with microdoses. But because we've relegated that to just a few states that have approved it, or even a few universities, you're missing a huge opportunity for research.
Those. I'm glad you brought that up. Those psychedelics it's very interesting. I'm seeing a lot of. I try to follow a lot of different science organizations that put out a lot of different stuff, and you're seeing. I don't know if accepted is the right word, but it's piquing people's interest a lot, and I think that there is something to consider there, for the federal government to back off in some way, some shape or fashion.
Absolutely, and for those who are really afraid of like you're running rampant with all sorts of psychedelics everywhere, here's the code word that they're using for the medical application is microdosing, and what that means is at a dosage that you don't notice it. You could be walking down the street, you could be going about your daily business, but it is affecting at the the brain synapse level and making huge strides.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and there's something to say for that,
right?
People should have that option and have that freedom to do that.
Well, especially for when you think of many soldiers came back from Afghanistan. All right, it takes anywhere from 2 to 7 years for any type of PTSD to really surface. And then they're going to be moving to either extreme mental health issues, which that's another issue we don't adequately address. Mm-hmm. From there, then they begin to self-medicate. And by the time you get them to the normal treatment options or to see a therapist, we have a shortage of therapists across the board. You're looking at 6 months just to see a therapist. That's why suicide rates are high. So if you're able to then find it with microdose levels to get them to begin to get that help and then parse it out once they're able to meet with a therapist,
yeah,
why would you not be in favor for it?
It's definitely obviously one of the big topics among in DC or across the whole world really is the war in Ukraine. Our foreign policy in general. How do we relate to what's our role in the world? Not only in Ukraine but in NATO. So can you talk to me about what's your thoughts on the war in Ukraine and in general your thoughts on the U.S.'s role abroad and as a whole?
Sure. As far let's go small first. So personal level, looking at the war in Ukraine is heinous, horrible. The way that Putin has invaded in a space that there was no need to. Mm-hmm. The worst of fears were not coming about. That I have a member of the church where I serve, in which she's from there and had literally just taken her sons who are graduating this year to visit relatives and everything. Had a great experience. Got back home and literally 2 weeks later, then boom, the war breaks out.
Wow.
So, personal level, it pains me to see. She's been helped us to be in contact with pastors and other churches that we can support that are helping with all sorts of ways.
Good.
And we get pictures and videos that are not on the internet that are just shocking.
Wow.
Then on a level with the United States and our foreign policies, part of this is a failure of the whole system. Even in our state politics, we're all about reacting. Something is, and then everything is blown up, and it's got to solve it immediately.
Yeah.
When if we could have looked a few years down the road and begun to build and slowly have a coalition across the countries, build that, because NATO is one thing, but you need that across the world. To have a system in place so that when something like this happens, you have a whole swath that says, wait a minute, let's do something now. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that you have to go in, that doesn't mean boots on the ground, but it does mean, for instance, I do celebrate the way that untold sanctions are happening, and they keep revisiting that to come up with more creative ways. Mm-hmm. I don't think we need to be the world's police agent. But with that said, NATO, I think, is kind of a determined factor of whether we should finally, join together as we see some of these atrocities come out. I don't think we should be the determining factor. Leave that to the countries that are closest and have the most impact with that: Finland, Poland. Mm-hmm. But in order for foreign policy, I think that's part of our failure. Even with as soon as the Cold War ended. It's like we had a lapse and okay, now what? We were really good at fighting. Here's this one thing. And instead of looking long range, even with our dignitaries, even with the people that we send out to our other countries, granted, some are able to stay for a long time, but many are appointed by different elected officials as like, here's a gift.
Yeah.
Here's a gift. Instead of thinking long range to build that coalition and communities so we hear the concerns in a great way.
Right. So I'm glad to hear you say, we're not the policeman of the world. So I guess at what point is NATO, would there responsibility? I mean, because NATO shouldn't respond to every conflict that happens. So I guess my question is more along the lines of what would be the standard? What would be the line in the sand that you would say, this warrants a response from not only the U.S. but NATO versus XYZ.
Right. And that I haven't kind of studied, to be honest. I do think that is what would be a good study on that is bringing together those who are really good at not just foreign policy, economic policy, military policy, to sit together in a room to hash out the different scenarios that are facing, to come up with a plan that people on the left or the right could look at and go, okay, that's the humanitarian response.
Right.
That's that's not just the moral, the ethical, but the human thing to do.
So you think that it should be a humanitarian? That should be a standard as far as at what point is this conflict? This conflict crosses the line on a humanitarian terms. That's I guess would be where you would say you would look to make that determination.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And it could be even in grades. Like we have our typical warning system. Okay, this is level F, and moving all the way up to A means full-on intervention.
Cool. So one of the things that so I'm not completely pivoting, but one of the things that does play into that, and just in general, I think with the state of our economy and really the world is government spending. Right now there was a $40 billion package voted to go to Ukraine. There was another bill just this yesterday, I believe it was, that was voted down in the Senate to provide $48 billion to small businesses and entrepreneurs. I'm not sure of all the details for COVID relief. So that's a lot of spending. Yeah. What is your thoughts on where does the government need to be as far as spending? Does it need to be in relation to inflation, to the economic state of the country? Do we need to just what's your thoughts on government spending?
So my first thought is, there's way too much spending. Number one. Number two is not enough accountability with what is spent. I mean, we're seeing that with the reports from Phil Bryant and the effects that it's having throughout Mississippi. The poorest of the poor are, so how can we have it set up in a way that provides accountability without setting up other government agencies that add more oversight and more burden and more bureaucracy? And that's a nuanced thing that I have not particularly fleshed out. I do think part of the government's role in that should, as far as a politician, me coming from Mississippi, my first thought in any vote is it good for Mississippi? Number one, which may mean there may be some things I may have to step across party lines, because that's my concern first is Mississippi.
Right.
Second in that is what we're spending if it's something that's over and above a budget. I know that there are advocates on there that want a zero-based budget or a balanced budget. It's so out of control, but here may be some ways that we can begin to bring it back in line. Is it making an investment into the future, and how is it paying off? Do we have a way to look at the data to see if we're really paying that off? Is it going to the thing that it was suggested for? For example, for a couple of the packages that have helped for COVID relief, both under Trump and Biden, there are many things that we don't know. We've got guesswork that it went into savings accounts, but really, whereas one area that we saw that did work was the child tax credit. That parents we saw were using it for what it was sent for, or at least for those basic needs there. And so you have something with direct data that if we're spending above, we know that it's paying into the future of something.
Right.
For example, one of my policies is looking at universal pre-K, which granted you could say, okay, that's going to cost some money there. Well, all right, how can we integrate it slowly in a way that also does justice to those places that have lots of daycare, to maybe bring them up, bring them alongside, but also you're paying into the future. Every single data point that we have for providing pre-K pays off. They're more likely to stay out of crime. They're more likely to be to have better social skills. They're more likely to further their education, whether that's a trade school or college. They're also more likely to get early testing. So we know, for example, here in Ocean Springs, Hattiesburg, we don't have to worry too much. It's still above 50% of children getting tested first through third grade. But every county in between, the majority of that testing for school-age children happens about fourth or fifth grade. Only, great, don't quote me on this, but it's below 20%. So I'll just say there, I want to say it's like 16, but it's below 20% actually get the testing they need for school.
Interesting.
For learning disabilities. So by the time you get it to by fourth grade, you're so far behind. Behind the reading skills that you need, the math skills that you need, the social skills that you need. Instead of provide it there, and you're paying off future profits. So that, when it comes to government spending, and how is it paying off, and can we measure that?
Right.
If we can't measure that, then we need to think about this. We need to wrestle with it, because it's like any business that's wanting to further down the line. Many businesses will take a debt hit to pay something off in the future, but they're also cautious of, can we measure it?
Sure.
Can we hold somebody accountable if this goes wrong? And that doesn't mean heads on the chopping block, but how can we then say, okay, that method isn't working. Let's bring in some others to have a better system.
Right. So it sounds like where you're looking at it as you're investing. You're investing, right. And even if it down the line is where it'll pay off. But what I'm also hearing is that you think there is some basis in maybe some type of audit, or really looking and making sure that it's being spent efficiently. Because I think that's regardless of what side of the aisle you're on and how much you believe should be spent, that everybody should be in favor of is making sure that it's spent. Whatever's being spent is spent efficiently and in the manner that we need it to be spent.
Right. A short answer to that would be, I have a sister that just retired from the IRS, and she said, we've got plenty in the budget to audit, and they're required to audit so many within certain brackets of income. However, the amount of time once you get to somebody over the $400,000 a year bracket that it takes to invest, now you're looking at millions in return. They've had cut after cut after cut after cut, and can't. That's why you see people making 40 to 200,000 are audited, because that's an age, a bracket that they can easily pinpoint and do quick audits. Yep. They don't have the time for that, and you're not. Whereas the payoff for the millions, that's where it could come.
Understood. Yeah. And you are you're hitting the nail on the head as far as being able to detect and address things early on. Ocean Springs has a fantastic dyslexia school here, yeah. and I learning about what they do and learning about just the state of the public schools. It seems like they provide a fantastic, and I think Ocean Springs school system is great, but the dyslexia school is really able to hone in and provide that very customized care for the children that are in there, and they have people who have went to school specifically for this. So I think that kind of is on point with what you're talking about as well.
Yeah, I'm a lived product of that. So my brother had dyslexia, and at a time in the 50s where they didn't know what that was. Luckily, my mother was an educator, kept pushing them at University of Southern Mississippi. Look, something else, because he had IQ would test huge, and then something else. Finally found a new person who's like, oh yeah, I've heard about this. And then by the time he was able to read, he was far behind, but he was able to catch up. So, but when I came along and had some issues, then boom, right in there early. And
over the past couple years with COVID, we've seen the CDC, really be able to really shape the way that society is going with, the recommendations. And I guess that kind of lead into my questions of what is it really recommendations? What's the power of all of these agencies? And I think there are a lot of people that have anxiety about different agencies. Dr. Fauci being, I don't know if too powerful is the right word, but essentially being able to executively control an entire industry or an entire segment of our country without a lot of necessarily input or direction, if you will, at least from the executive branch or what have you. So can you talk to me about what kind of balance should there be between, making sure that these agencies have the ability to do what they have to do, and then making sure that we have, a transparent, that our elected officials are able to control the levers of power, if you will.
Sure. So I'll take the reverse of this one. Let's start large.
Yeah.
So this is one of those things that Congress has in the modern Congress. There are so many things that they're not getting done with. They've had to then outsource, if you would, to the different agencies. And the benefit of that is you can define the parameters of that. It's like having an assistant. You tell the assistants, here's what I need done, here are the parameters, let them go. And then you can readjust. Well, let's know a 3-hour lunch break is not good. Let's move it to But they can then adjust. And what has happened in Congress a lot of times is they've released and had these agencies without coming back to readjust. Mm-hmm. What is the level of oversight? What are the parameters coming out, especially of a pandemic? Is a great time to do that. Mm-hmm. I would say probably in the next 2 years would be a better time, because you need a little more time to look back. Because while you're going through something, you don't catch all the nuances that have happened. But you and I have probably noticed several just in the process. Like you said, Dr. Fauci, for many others to pick up on those agencies. The next level is on the roll for those agencies is how much power, and part of that will come from a readjusting of those. But some comes then at the very local level. At the very local level, it should be empowered that if a business sees a safety issue, for example, with COVID, or right now we had the monkeypox that's coming through. Granted, we don't have a screening for it. I mean, we don't have a vaccine for that. But let's say there's a huge outbreak, they have a vaccine for it. It has suddenly become, the early stages of COVID would be like, it was so dangerous, so vicious. My brother was one that caught it and was one of the first ones in his group to go on the vent, and the only one from his group that came off the vent. And so it was the fear, and plus it was politicized and not taking it seriously enough. We had measures that we could have put in place very quickly. So that's an area that if those agencies would have given a little more power to work and to cooperate, to have some sort of virus task force that could make those recommendations and see those things of what's coming down the pike. We don't know what's worse than now we're at a place to see, okay, what worked, what didn't work. And I know I skipped ahead, but coming back to the local level, for example, right now, if you're entering college, I went to graduate school and missed a couple of vaccinations and had to go back for that. Well, that's properly understandable. You're large groups of people in large settings, you don't want that spread. Mm-hmm. I've taken mission trips to third world countries where they said, nope, you must have this other vaccine in order to go. Well, because we don't want to. We have made some of this and forgotten that part of this is a safety issue. Mm-hmm. A little bit like when seatbelts were first instituted in Mississippi. Right. We had a lot of pushback, but remember the commercials that were there, the life you save may not be your own. Mm-hmm. Because of just instituting and helping others to put in a simple safety seatbelt. Mm-hmm. Same thing. So when other industries decided we need that vaccine, you need it there. For example, many of the news agencies, including Fox News, instituted a vaccine for all of those, even though they were spreading all of this dissension amongst them. They had a vaccine policy to be employed there. Uh-huh. And perhaps looking at it in various degrees, because there was no definite mandate. It was a mandate that said if you did not have the vaccine, you could also get tested, because it was a safety issue. Right. The question then becomes, okay, what is the necessity for that safety? At what point, at what level does something get that we need something there? And then what's the process to evaluate, did we go about it the right way? Which is.
Do you think that at what level should, or I guess at what point, it would probably be a better way of putting it, should the CDC be able to mandate something? Or is that something that should just be by the state? departments, or should the CDC, maybe if it gets to a certain point, then the CDC would be able to take over and have extra powers? Like, I guess, where do you see the CDC power stopping from becoming a recommendation and a mandate?
Right. That's a good question. Having when I was in graduate school at Emory, got to see a lot of the CDC experimentation and the dangerous rooms where they just said, we're staying over here, and all the agents and everything else is locked up in freezers, and as well as the testing labs and you name it. They have the utmost concern for people out there, and it's building that system of trust. At the beginning of this, I think one of the measures that was missing was to say, here is all along the way of what has happened in other countries in our response, from the Asian flu to this, to this, to this, and this. Their first response is microscopic first before pulling out global. They're not looking to shut down because they know it affects the economy, it affects more of our fears, it generates more. So having those powers, I think, like I said, 2 years from now is a great time, because we've had some time to get apart from it and look at, did we give them too much? Or where is the point that we do allow them to have some of those powers, but what's the lead up to that? That can be done in a way that is nonpartisan, that is trustworthy, that is safe for everyone. Which I know doesn't really give you those direct parameters you're looking for, but I would want to gather a room of people who have looked at all of those different ways, and then let's hammer something out.
Gotcha.
Because we miss something by just shooting for one direction or the other direction. If we just bring in the people from the 1,000-foot view but miss the person on the ground.
So a coalition, essentially, what you're saying and that's as you know, from being a former mayor, one thing that I took a trip to DC as representing, and that's one thing that we sat down with the White House, and they were trying to get our input on just various issues. And so I think there is something to that, of bringing local, the municipal level, at the county level, the state level, get them all in the room and say, hey, what works for y'all, what works for us, what's your concerns, what's something we need to think about. So it's essentially, that's what you're saying, is have this coalition and I would not put words in your mouth, but I would assume you would want not only elected officials from the state level, but different representatives from all kinds of different organizations and
urban, rural, and this also lets them decide, okay, here, because your local officials really have the best interests for the people that are there locally. And it may come about, here's some ways that are so unique for Mississippi, or we have different parts of Mississippi. I mean, when you think about it, you've got like the coastline. There might be a coalition along the coastline that is comprised of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and all the way around, that has a group of leadership through that's just unique to them, and you don't need something from this federal level opposed down when they can handle it. The Delta swath, same thing there, but then there may be some general things that would impact.
Understood. Well, so those were all my questions that I had, but I wanted to, is there anything that we didn't cover that you think that is important you'd like the citizens to know?
Sure. Part of mine is just to let you know a little bit of, I identified some practical issues. I thought that's what was missing. A lot of times in politicians, they'll give you the 1,000-foot view, but not say, here's some practical things to do about it.
Yeah.
So I looked at education. I mentioned the universal pre-K. I looked at labor, which looking at raising the minimum wage. Many will say $15 an hour won't do it in Mississippi, but we definitely know that $7.25. And whatever that is at the federal level, let's index it to inflation, so we don't have to politicize it anymore. Joining the rest of the world with paid family medical leave and the Paycheck Fairness Act, equal pay for equal work. I know that we just passed something in Jackson, but I've looked at it, and it's kind of a sham of what you could with you really want equal pay and equal work. And then we mentioned right at the top that ending the war on drugs. First level of that, I believe, is marijuana. The second level is looking at mandatory minimums. The third level is criminal justice issues of it, and even providing better access for veterans courts, drug courts, rehabs, but also a way to hold insurance companies accountable to levels of rehabs that we have.
Oh yeah.
And so I've seen that quite a bit, where somebody's just starting to get the help that they need, and insurance says, "Nope, you're out of here." And I'm like, "Whoa, wait a minute!" And you're sending them to die, really, for a lot of times.
Right. And mental health it's sad because it's becoming such an epidemic. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but from what I understand, overdose every year it hits a new record high. And with fentanyl, we're seeing people pass away from fentanyl overdose. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't fully comprehend the weight of is just how many people are losing their life based on things that they're falling through the cracks.
Oh yes, yes, and the mental health issues didn't start like over. Most of the time people think of somebody with extreme bipolar, or schizophrenia, or something. But coming out of this pandemic, so many people we've seen with high anxiety that's through the roof, and now it's to a place that's debilitating. The amount that it's costing work. I saw a statistic the other day, and I won't quote the numbers, I'll get them wrong. Let's say millions that it costs businesses every year because of failure to address basic mental health, depression, anxiety, simple grief work.
Right.
That if you had somebody guiding people through, that would help so much. My campaign manager would be remiss if I didn't mention my endorsements, which the only reason I do it is not to brag, but here's the coalition that I've built so far, and many other candidates at this point, except for Palazzo, have not had several endorsements. United Rural Democrats of America, the AFL-CIO, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and then finally the largest college Democratic group in the state. So,
good deal.
So that's been fun actually, because when you get a large group together, you can then parse out. Because it's one thing knocking on doors, you get the individual. It's hard to hit those larger groups, and I've gone to everybody. Those who I spoke to one church that I know definitely probably nobody will vote for me, but I like listening.
Yeah.
To see what are definite our concerns, that we can finally find common ground to move us to the top of some of those good lists, if you will.
Thank you for sitting down with me real quick. Tell everybody where they can find you. Got social media handles and websites, or?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. You can find me online at www.davidsellersms.com. All social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at David Sellers MS, or David Sellers for Congress will show up. We're not on Twitter, but we're thinking after the primary, we'll not Twitter, excuse me, TikTok.
That's
okay.
One,
but I am
that's a fun one. That's
definitely on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Well, David, I appreciate you, and good luck to you on the campaign, and get out there. It's a hot day, so good luck knocking on the doors.
Great. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it.